Good morning again to all of you. Spiritual gurus from various walks of life have time and again taught us life mantras. Sri Rajiv Mehrotra will talk to us about the teachings of the spiritual leader, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, in this session, Nurturing Our Minds, secular teachings from the Dalai Lama. We welcome Mr. Mehrotra to the IFSI studio. Mr. Rajiv Mehrotra is an Indian writer, television producer-director, documentary filmmaker, a personal student of the Dalai Lama for whom he manages as trustee and secretary of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility established with the Nobel Peace Prize. He is best known as the former acclaimed host of one of India's longest running talk shows, In Conversation. He has authored 9 books that have been published in 50 editions and languages. They are primarily on spirituality. We invite Mr. Mehrotra to begin his talk, please.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome to my fellow travelers on this journey of life. I really am no one special and just a struggling aspirant, and here to share some thoughts and perspectives of my own journey and my learning from them as a student of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who has been very kind and generous to me. As the anchor said that there are numerous mantras and strategies that have been put out by different religions and traditions as to how we can be happy and to avoid suffering. And the reason we have sort of flagged this as a secular approach is not necessarily to keep faith out of it, but out of the recognition and the celebration of diversity. Each one of us is a different human being, though we all share our humanness, the human body, and the characteristics of being human. But each one of us have different mental dispositions. And so we follow different paths and different approaches in our journeys to be happy. And very often, when we get stuck and attached to any one particular approach as being my way or the highway, we tend to limit the opportunities that we have for our own learning and growth. So as we all need a different mental diet, just as we need a different physical diet. So not everyone will like the same food. Not everyone will be able to digest the same food. Not everyone will feel nourished by the same food. And that is really true of the different paths and traditions that are offered. And so we celebrate that. And so there are, however, sort of a whole strategy of philosophies and ideas and approaches do not necessarily need to tag on to a particular formal structures, and that they are based on the, I will use the Buddha somewhat reluctantly, but I think it's a very important echo of what his aspiration was in this direction. And so the Buddha said when he was dying and people were weeping and mourning his passage, he said, look, my teachings are not final or the last word. You must subject them to your reason, to your logic, and to your experience, so that in case there is something that does not stand up to these, then you should reject them. And so many great masters, and I think His Holiness the Dalai Lama also says that and asks that whatever philosophies we follow, whether those that he teaches or others teach, must be subject to our experience. And so he felt that in our sort of journey, as in some ways this is considered the era of reason and science and rationality, as faith fell away or diminished on our planet, we should reach out and start looking for and identifying strategies that did not lock us in to a particular approach, and that it should stand up to our everyday experience, reason, and logic, and something that we might be able to introduce in our communities, in schools, in colleges, in our everyday living, with the hope that they would be more inclusive, and that all people from all traditions might be able to find comfort through them without feeling threatened or feeling superior in either way. And this also really is the essence of our great civilizational heritage, that we have so many within our country. I mean, the major leading strands have, of course, been the different approaches within whatever and however we choose to describe Hinduism, which have broadly, as Swami Vivekananda said, have been divided into the Raja Yoga, the way of training the mind, the Bhakti Yoga of devotion, Jnana Yoga that teaches us how to approach this through wisdom, and so on and so forth. So each one of these responds to different mental dispositions. And the other genius has been that we have looked at both method and wisdom. And this is a particular challenge because, very often, or I'd say usually, or virtually all the time, that we are told what to think, what we can do to, and how we should feel, and without really the method of being able to do that. So, for example, someone might say, "Oh, I mean, what is unfolding is Maya. It's all an illusion, and so don't take it seriously." So, an aspirant like me will say, "Yeah, I know that's wonderful. That don't take it's all an illusion, but I can't stop treating illusion as reality, and that's why I'm told I'm suffer." And so, it is so crucial that we look both at wisdom and method, and the process needs to lead to reflexive action, so that when I am confronted by a catalyst or an impetus that causes me to suffer and experience pain and unhappiness, at that moment, my sort of feelings need to spontaneously arise to, I don't know what, give me comfort, to reassure me. And so this normally goes through a process of, receiving information about the true nature of reality. And, our traditions have argued that we suffer because we do not see, acknowledge, and accept the true nature of reality. And the knowledge of it, and then, of course, the understanding of it. But it is only when understanding translates into realization that it becomes transforming. So you will find numerous self-help books. There will be thousands of people telling us that we should not feel hatred, we should not fear death, and we should embrace all of humanity. But we know all these things, but somehow it doesn't become a part of our internal landscape. And that really is the challenge. So I will be trying to look at both some aspects of the nature of reality, and that are crucial and let's say secular, in the sense that no matter what your faith, it's unlikely that you will not be in consonance with that idea. And then some aspects of the method, and also some understanding of human psychology, and a little bit about what we also have a tradition of antidotes, which means that there are specific processes if we feel jealousy or we feel what we call negative emotions that lead to unhappiness. But I mean, maybe I'll just start at the very beginning and suggest that I think most people would agree that the purpose of life is to seek happiness, and that we all want happiness and we want to avoid suffering. And we've also sort of learned that the external events can affect a person's happiness in the short term, but then our level of happiness, or the lack of it, tends to move back to the baseline soon after the event is. So I might, in the company of friends, or delicious food, or a drink, whichever variety we find of value, will give us a sense of, a sense of high and a sense of fulfillment. Or we go away on a wonderful vacation, and we come back, and then we're back to square one. And so when people also confront sort of sudden and cataclysmic events, such as someone we love deeply dies, or you get a diagnosis of cancer, it takes a long time to recover the previous levels of happiness. And so we know that it needs no specific external conditions that can truly define our enduring sense of happiness. And I mean, I use the word happiness with considerable caution because I think the American marketplace and the American Constitution have made happiness a goal. And obviously it is a very different level of happiness. And so we, in our traditions here in the East, we call it, by various names, Ananda, Sukha. And so, you can translate as bliss and joy. And but we are here looking at what is perhaps, a closer description would be an enduring, fulfilling sense of equanimity and fulfillment, where the mind is not busying itself with desires that it is unable to fulfill. That's sort of an incomplete attempt. How can you describe a complex mental state, no matter what it is? And that really teaches us that the mind is a very powerful tool, and it is how we perceive the world, and how negative emotions, which we in our tradition also call them kleshas, can skew our view of people and our own experience of what is happening. So when that happens, even what traditionally brings us joy, which means that perhaps good friends, and when we are in that mental state, that we can find them annoying, cold, and hostile. But it is important to recognize that it is possible to systematically train our minds so that we can identify and nurture positive mental states while eliminating or diluting the negative ones. And though it is a slow, gradual process, it can and does bring calmness that allows us to live a happy, joyous life, no matter what the external situation is. I just want to, quote, relate a recent experience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And there was an international conference on training the mind, and the different approaches. And so, for 4 days, people were coming in and making presentations on the different practices and techniques as to how they brought about or facilitated behavior change. And the studies that were done, that people did so-and-so practice or listen to so-and-so lectures, and 2 weeks or 3 weeks, when psychological testing was done, there had been a major change. And so His Holiness listened to this very patiently. And at the end of that many days, he said, look, I'm whatever, 80 plus. I've been practicing for 75 odd years. And, behavior change is difficult. Even I sometimes get angry. But the difference is the relationship to that anger, that he experiences these emotions and is able to observe them, and they may not manifest themselves long enough to be able to cause him to lose his equanimity or to create distress to other people. So I say this because, to emphasize that in the process of nurturing the mind, there is no easy, instant solution. There is no one book that you can read that will, in an enduring manner, or a single lecture, or a particular philosophy, or even a particular understanding that will give you some kind of instant happiness that will endure. And so there is in this journey a quality of lightness. It's if you make too little effort, then nothing happens, because even as a little progress you make is immediately antidoted by the overwhelming conditioning that continues to respond with despair, with negativity, with anger to what unfolds. And equally, if you try too hard, it's you have to be kind and gentle with yourself. And the example that is often given is like the strings of a violin or a sitar, that if they're loose, you won't get the harmony of the tune. If they're too tight, the string will snap, and so will you, because we will have set ourselves impossibly high standards. Having said that, the journey offers its rewards, as it were, pretty early on. I mean, they're not as powerful and impactful as we might like to see. And another story that I in my conversation with His Holiness when I've been practicing for some years, and I went to him and I said that, look, Your Holiness, you're my teacher, and I've been practicing for so long and nothing is happening. And he pointed out, he said that, look, the minute you think something is happening, it's may not really be true, because it is you then get stuck to that particular perspective on your achievement, and growth stops. And so whenever you feel that something extremely positive is happening, it's like happiness, that when you become conscious that you're happy, happiness becomes to fade. And in fact, this principle is applied in a lot of modern day therapies and practices, that you just bring to awareness your anger or your frustration or what have you. And this is also the root of Western psychiatry. Then it disappears. But this equally applies to what we conventionally define as happiness. And so perhaps equanimity, when is a more apt word. And another, the sort of common description of this is that when you go out on a holiday and you're looking at a beautiful landscape, the first impulse is not to experience it and have it give you joy and comfort, but to somehow capture it and freeze it as an image that you can look at later or perhaps share with other people. And so the experience of the experience is lost the minute it is given a label and conceptualized and frozen. So these are sort of the outliers, as it were, of the framework that defines the nurturing of the mind. And while sort of spiritual beliefs can certainly be benefit us in nurturing equanimity, we must constantly remind ourselves that the nuances within them have to respond to our own personal temperaments, proclivities, and most importantly, efforts. So one size, even within a structure, does not fit everyone. So there are some of these sort of recognitions, shall I say, or realities that we need to acknowledge and first see it as knowledge and then understand them. And I will look at some techniques of realization that come up. And I think the first important thing is to recognize that, as I said, that it is legitimate for people to want happiness, to recognize that that is what we want and we are entitled to as a human species, and that there are two kinds of sufferings, and one is the suffering that comes from it being a part of the human condition. And so we will all, the birth, when we're born, it's very painful for the fetus coming out into the world, as it is to the mother who's giving birth. Then there's, of course, old age, sickness, death, and things that are not immediately in our control, the impact of the changing environment, the impact on our thoughts and feelings when we see images of what is unfolding in the war in Ukraine, regardless of who is right and which side you're on. The fact is that when we see these images of pain and suffering, they remind us of the potential for suffering in the human conditions. And I think that in our traditions in the East, and we tend to be far more accepting of pain and suffering, and our threshold tends to be much higher than in the West, because we are surrounded by so much poverty and pain, within our own homes often, and even when we just step out into our out of our cocoons. And when we try and avoid this reality that we will, each one of us, as we grow older, will experience, and people are born with these conditions. It can happen at any time. We will experience the pain of ill health and sickness and accidents, and of those we love or we care about, and even those that we don't particularly care about. We can be moved and agonize over the human condition and the and its predicament. And so trying to avoid or ignore that reality is only a very temporary solution. So whether it is us experiencing our pain or the pain of others that impacts us, we can distract ourselves. We can, through drugs or alcohol or holidays or parties or being busy, but we cannot escape it. But what we can nurture the mind to do is to train ourselves that the suffering of suffering is diminished. While we are in human form, whether it's a Buddha or it's Jesus Christ or whichever tradition that you subscribe to, each one of the great masters had this enormous capacity to be able to experience and connect with other people's pain, and be willing and able, as Christ did on the cross, to take on the pain of others, or as in the case of Sri Ramakrishna, one of my other great idols, as other religious teachers, that when they confronted the pain of imminent death, or had cancer, Ramana Maharishi and Sri Ramakrishna, they were willing to and able to endure that pain, not as some kind of abstract virtue, but as the nature of unfolding reality. And there is always the risk that when that happens, we feel like victims and immediately ready to blame other people for what happens to us. So what we need to be doing really is to work to eliminate the mental roots, change our minds, change our relationship to it. And so while suffering may be natural, we often inadvertently perhaps magnify it ourselves by subjecting ourselves to deep, unimaginable anguish, and that happens because we're unable to, and we find it extremely unpleasant, and we resist acknowledging and responding to the true nature of reality. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these elements of the true nature of reality, and these have huge implications in the way we relate to and respond to the external and internal circumstances of our lives. And many traditions will tell you, and it's also just reason and logic, that if we ignore reality, we will suffer. So, for example, if we ignore the reality that if we put our finger into fire, it will burn, it's going to burn, and we are going to feel the pain of it. And similarly, if we, ignore the reality of death, we are going to suffer all that much more when we confront death, whether our own or that of others. And it's not just the impermanence that leads to death, but also the implicit in the whole process of understanding and engaging and coming to terms with death is to recognize the very simple principle of impermanence. Things keep changing. So it's not just that things are permanent or not permanent in absolute terms, but minute by minute, moment by moment, everything is in a process of change. We are changing. Every cell in our body is changing. Mount Everest is, growing by, so that many millimeters. The oceans, the land, the land mass is shifting and changing. The new car that we have just driven out of the dealers, which we have dealers, and its fabulous display, begins to get little scratches that we don't see, and then we see and we're anguished, and then we want to scrub out the scratches and hope that somehow that car, or perhaps more appropriately these days for more of us, the cell phone, will stay in that brand new condition. And we're deeply anguished when it changes. We're deeply anguished in relationships that, we have, friends and family and husbands and wives and children. And just as we keep changing in our tastes and our preferences and our priorities, that happens to them too. And, we seem to be frozen with our expectations that went and reached back to a long time ago. And when we had first met, perhaps, or when we had first experienced or encountered whatever it is that is changing. So that fundamental recognition that all elements of life, including our minds, are impermanent and subject to change. Now, that's not always necessarily a negative thing. The fact that our minds can change, thank God for that, or we would all eternally be frozen in our fears and pain and our discomforts. So just as it is possible that change is not always negative. A change can be positive, and then that depends on our relationship to change and how we manage change. The change can be as much an opportunity gained as it can be an opportunity lost. A relationship that diminishes or a relationship that grows. So the recognition that change is unavoidable, inevitable, is seminal, and at the same time, the recognition that it has several possibilities and dimensions to it. I think the other pillar that this notion of reality that it stands on is the idea of interdependence. That we need to recognize that the self of the sense of the self and the I and the me and the mine is an exaggerated sense of who we are, and we only have to reflect on the number of people and the circumstances that make our lives possible. Here I am talking to you. I might have to a little aside that it's somewhat disconcerting because all I can see is my face on the screen as I talk to you. I'm trying to come to terms with that sense of the I talking to myself. But my ability to do that and to be seen by you, who are hopefully, some of you at least are listening, I have no idea, is dependent on people who have created the technology, of my dear and wonderful friend Manjari, who organizes these amazing events, and the clothes I wear, the technician, and a whole range of intermediaries that just make this little small process compared to the many connections that happen on our planet at different levels of being, and our very existence. We're dependent on the sperm and the egg of our parents. From our birth, it's mother's love, our education, and the car we drive and the coffee we drink. If you just think sometimes if you're addicted to coffee, our sense of gratitude to the person who grew the coffee, who processed it, transported it, packaged it to the coffee distillation machine that produces it. So every moment, every activity of our lives is dependent on other people. And so the minute we begin to recognize our interdependence and our impermanence, we experience a shift. And I do argue, as I did in the beginning of my talk or conversation with you, that this is not merely a case of me telling you about it or telling myself about it, or my having been exposed to this and being transformed by it. It is a process that involves hard work, and we often forget that just as we spend thousands of hours, and I think the Rubicon is something like 10,000 hours to become a genius, or to become a great violinist, to become to do yoga in the manner that the great icons like B.K. Iyengar in Pune, where not very far from where the organizers of this event are located, achieved that level of skill and efficiency. So these things take time to imprint the antidotes, perhaps is one way of looking at it, into our consciousness. Because what is it that determines our actions? And very often, particularly in the Eastern traditions where we talk about karma, we say that this is just the consequence of my previous karma, the way I feel or the way I act or what is happening to me. I think that's a misunderstanding of karma. Karma is not a passive playing out of past actions, and it is not a singular that I do X and so the result is Y. I think it's more akin to the imprints on our consciousness or our minds that we seek to change. So what really happens is that the way the mind and consciousness work is that each of our actions and each of our experiences, particularly where there is volition, and leaves an imprint on our minds. And so we call it positive karma if the imprint is positive, and negative if it is negative. And again, there is a great deal of overlap between these two. And what is it that determines the positivity or the negativity of it is the motivation, is what is the intention. I mean, I'm not going to go into a whole discussion on the theory of karma here, but it is because there are different levels of the impact that those actions have on our brains. And these impacts on our brains create predispositions for future experiences, future emotions, and future actions. So what we can do through whatever techniques, and I will suggest a few of them, is to be able to change and impact our mental diets so that the antidotes to what we might call negative imprints can be diluted, if not eliminated. And there is a hierarchy. So, for example, if you have engaged in an extreme act, and many religious traditions, certainly in India, would say, for example, killing your guru would be an extreme imprint on your subtle mind, which would be very difficult to dilute. So what we do is, through the practices and techniques, we try and change the mental diet and change the nature of the imprints that register on our mind stream so that in future we are impacted and we move from information and knowledge to realization. And the reason I say this is a secular process of nurturing the mind, that this really has nothing to do or little to do with formal structures of religion or philosophy. And we don't have to worry too much about whether you believe in a particular god or a particular deity. And it is perfectly compatible with whatever your belief system may be. And everything I say must be and needs to be subject to this process of analysis and scrutiny. And so I think that contemporary, to the degree that we're empirically able to measure and evaluate some of these techniques and methods, it is now sort of, and tradition teaches us that the starting point of this is concentration. So most of our suffering happens because Swami Vivekananda and many traditions describe the mind as the monkey mind. So how do we tame the monkey mind? And again, the harder we try to train it and restrain it, the more difficult it becomes. And a very, very, very simple example is that the more you try to tune out an irritating sound, you'll find that the more you hear it. The more you're determined not to do something, you begin to hear it. So it involves that subtle play of balance, of letting go and of being aware, which only practice can teach you. I mean, we can teach you till doomsday how to balance yourself on a bicycle, but unless you achieve that through practice and you just end up doing it, and then it becomes spontaneous and reflex, no amount of theorizing is going to be able to teach you to do that, or even swimming. I mean, there are techniques involved which will enable you to swim faster. There are techniques involved that will sort of help you arrive at being able to swim or float or whatever. or even playing a violin, or producing great music. There is an internalized balancing that goes on, which is acquired through a combination of surrender, of knowledge and wisdom, and it all comes together through the engaging in it, and that really is how this unfolds. However, there are techniques, which means really just the practice of concentration, and at the bottom line of all our aspirations is the starting point is the cultivation of concentration, and there are as many techniques as there are, I guess, human beings, and so we have to, with a little bit of experimentation, find our own. In many of the yoga traditions, you would look at a candle and just keep concentrating on the candle, or in other traditions, you can look at an image of a deity, and then shut your eyes and keep visualizing the deity. Or even when you do jap, you chant. That is a form of concentrating your mind on the sound. And now that sound could have association and be evocative for you. I live very near a Sufi shrine, and I was walking there, and I spent some time recently, and I found the Sufis there were chanting Allah, 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 in not a very in similar ways that I might chant, I don't know what, to Saraswati, or to Ganesh, or to the Buddha, or to some Buddhist deity. So the important thing is to be able to look and find an object, a worthy object of concentration, because you could concentrate on I don't know what. I mean, so seeking revenge from somebody, or the flavor of the recent whatever, I don't know, single malt whiskey, and so it depends on, and to find a worthwhile object of concentration, and to practice with that. People concentrate on their breath, and can do body scans to concentrate on the sensations of their body. Each one of these has value and meaning, and you really have to use a little bit of common sense and to find that object, and to try and spend some time, the impetus for doing so. And what then is the impetus for doing so? Why do you do this? And one would argue that the 2-3 factors that come in, that the teachings from the different traditions and of contemporary everyday being and everyday lives, we learn from them, we're inspired by them, and somewhere, the first step is an act of faith, because we can never completely understand or internalize what someone else tells us or teaches us. But very soon, if we're a little patient, we begin to see the rewards, and particularly as they begin to increasingly endure in the space that we come up to. So the first element is concentration, and there are different ways of achieving it, and it's not the scope of being here my talk to go into them in detail. And then we have an approach that which is more specific to the internalization of the mental diet, and that is analysis. So when the mind reaches, through whatever method, through pranayam, walk on the beach, concentrating on something that's of value, an image of a deity, when the mind is calm, we then begin to follow sort of a structured process of thinking that then creates these imprints in our consciousness. And I think today, research, both in laboratories and from our ancient tradition, demonstrates that compassion is the most valuable emotion or sensibility that we can cultivate. And it is based on reason and logic, not just because it's goody or virtuous, or will get us brownie points for the gods. But when we begin to think of others without seeking something in return, our sense of the self softens and our suffering diminishes. Because today we know, and we have known this through history, but today it has been confirmed by psychological testing, that when people are suffering, there is an exaggerated sense of themselves, the I, me, mine. So I am upset, I am angry, I am ill, I want this and I didn't get this, and this has happened to me. So the me, and the I. And of course, I mean, the sprinkling of even a little sort of a general sense of all the approaches to philosophy and faith are positioned to nurture an outer directedness. So whether it is devotion to God, so that you stop thinking less about yourself, or an obsession with another human being, so that you begin to think about them and not yourself. Though it's temporary, then your suffering diminishes and you feel this great sense of bliss, till that the object of that obsession disappears or lets you down or turns back and is not very kind to you. So the sense of that the I reappears. And so to nurture compassion while contemplating, and to plant these seeds of a universal, a larger compassion for all sentient beings, which mean all beings who are living and who have sensibilities. So that would mean animals, dogs, and human beings, and even the planet that has a certain life to it. And so that softens the sense of the self that suffers. And similarly, as when I was talking about interdependence, is really to recall, when we sit down in this state of relative calm, comfort, and ease, and the mind can focus and concentrate, is to just recount some of the things that I mentioned, and others will come up for you, that, look, my life is dependent on so many people, and not just my life of being alive, but my needs, my emotional needs, my needs for mental peace, and even a holiday. So when I go to a holiday, somebody enables me to get to the holiday, the place I stay, somebody who maintains that. So we are infinitely dependent on other people. And so once we begin to reflect on that, it begins to get imprinted on our consciousness. And so it is that effort that generates this. And sometimes if we have, when we're talking about these imprints on our consciousness, so these are sort of the generalized, antidotes. So if we at some point feel that we have done something or an action that has had a very negative impact on our minds and still governs us, and we become aware of it, and this may take a long time before we become aware of it. It's something we did, 10 years ago. Someone to whom we caused great pain, or we were unfair. That left an imprint in our consciousness. So it's possible in this time of poise and calm to reflect on that. And the classic antidote is to reflect on it with deep regret, and then to make a commitment to oneself not to do it again, and to do this with a sense of kindness, that we are all fallible, and then to start looking at, if at that time we felt hatred for that person, to begin to try and feel kindness now to that person. So this is just one example. I mean, if we ever have the space, for workshops and to delve deeper into the specific things that we can do to antidote these processes that have been unfolding for us. And so compassion is how do I put it? It's also useful to one's self. So it's outer directed, but it's skillful because it also is adding value to who we are. And so it really is to sort of emphasize that we can, and to believe that we can, because it's demonstrated in the lives of, and I don't want to just say great masters, because the great masters are people those we hear of and are familiar names. But when we look around ourselves and look at the idea of interdependence and impermanence and compassion, that it's not a black and white situation. There are so many people who will be predominantly compassionate and caring, and we benefit and we draw nurture and sustenance from who they are. So with practice, we can train ourselves that when something happens, unpleasant happens to us, instead of it overwhelming us, it can take, in a little time, we can find a perspective. So things are not 100% good or 100% bad. And we can train ourselves to begin to look increasingly at the learning from suffering, perhaps, or learning from failure as to what lessons we learned. So there are as many teachers as there are possibilities of the things that we can do in order to accommodate the challenges and the threats that we feel to our equanimity. And the sources of anxiety are as many as are the preventive measures that we can apply. And the underlying emerging approach is that of cognition, which Western psychotherapy has been inculcating. And I share this because it has both opportunities and risks. That so it is like bringing to surface something that is creating distress, or reliving events that have happened in the past that we are unable to process, and we still feel it guides us. I think there are two sides of this, and common sense and a sense of balance are extremely important, because very often it can reinforce itself. It can yield processes that we're not able to understand or accommodate or accept at this time. And so I'm wary of any instant glib formula. And it is our life, or our lives in our minds, and we have to deal with them, or with what is unfolding, with a sense of our own responsibility. Having said that, I do know, that from my own experience and people I have worked with and are friends of mine, in different stages of their own evolution, is the issue that often comes up is of medication. When is a pharmacological intervention necessary? And I know that this is an increasing trend. And there is no sort of singular opinion about it, because sometimes we can be in a very difficult state of mental disequilibrium, And when a pharmacological intervention done by a caring doctor and physician, I hasten to add, could help us with the window to heal and recover. And the analogy to that is, and I think it's for me it's a very important, impactful one, is, for example, when we say we have ulcers and we're suffering from hyperacidity. Now, someone can say to us, well, you just need to change your diet. But changing a diet is not enough because the ulcer is in terrible shape and it may well need surgery. And so we can treat it, we can take antacids and help it heal, so long as we then simultaneously work with the physical diet that we're taking. So we continue to take hyperacidic food, that effort or that window that we needed in order to heal from acidity is wasted or can become counterproductive, and then we can keep taking medication unless we have simultaneously dealt with pharmacological intervention. So I think it's the path is to be approached with great kindness to oneself, great humility, and one of the most limiting things that we can do for ourselves and to others and those we love is to present any alternative or strategies, approaches with the certitude that this is the one single and only way. So thank you very much for listening so patiently. I hope that I have made some sense, but talking to you, even though I haven't seen you, has been a wonderful self-reflection for me, and I've been looking at myself, and that hasn't been easy. So thank you very much, and I send out a prayer that your journey of life is one that gives you comfort and awakening and flourishing. Thank you very much for listening so patiently.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for sharing such valuable knowledge with us. And also, thank you for being our IFSI guest. We will begin our next discussion, Relevance of Jain Way of Living Today, at 12:30 p.m. See you then.